So thank you to all of you for joining us. It's really wonderful to see so many people from so many places. Just looking through the chat and seeing, all of these cities, it's really so fantastic. So my name is Hyacinth Walters-Olsen. As I just said, I'm from Manchester in the UK. I live in Oslo, Norway, and have been here for about the last 4 years. I'm the founder of Consult, which is a training and mentoring organization. And we promote growth and change through collaboration. I'm also a DEIB, that's diversity, equality, inclusion and belonging consultant. And I do some consultancy work with Diversify, who is one of Norway's premier providers of diversity training. So I do some consultancy with them. We have a great panel for you today. And today what we thought we would do, because this is a conversation that is talking about deconstructing unconscious bias, we thought we would have a panel that was very reflective of community, so not necessarily coming from expert positions, but people from the community who will, this is very much a conversation. So welcome, this is initiative of Diversify, where it's a part of the series that is about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And today we will be discussing deconstructing unconscious bias, as I just mentioned. I will ask the guests to introduce themselves shortly, but I'll just cover a few house rules before we begin. Thank you. It's great to see everybody on camera. You all look really lovely, and thank you so much for joining us. What I'd ask you to do is, once we get going, if you have your camera on, that's fantastic, you don't have to, but what I will ask you to do once we get running is to put your, if you go to the top right, you'll see that you can either choose speaker view, or you can click on the little grid and have gallery view. So I'll ask you to click speaker view. That way it will just help you to focus and not be distracted by, whatever you might see happening in the background there. And if you are on camera, it would be great, for the speaker to be able to see who they're speaking to. This is not a performance, I like to say that, it's a conversation. So we will ask you to join us, to engage with us, to either use your reactions, the emoticons, to put your hand up if you agree with a particular post, or also to write a comment in the comments box in the chat. And if you do write a comment, please preface it with saying comments and then your comment. If you're going to ask us a question, which you're very welcome to ask questions, please also preface that by saying question, just so that it will be easy for me to be able to scroll through and be able to have question and answer session. So the format for today, this session is for 2 hours, and we will converse with the speakers for 90 minutes. And as you're listening, please write your questions. And then for the last 30 minutes, we will do a Q&A session to answer your questions that you deliver. As we're talking about unconscious bias, it's a topic that can generate feelings of animosity or upset or hurt. So we'll just ask for, the conversations or the comments, the questions to still be respectful, honorable, and, for us to be able to just have a conversation. We welcome any perspective. That's what this conversation is about. So we don't need to be in agreement. We don't need to try and create sheep. That is not the agenda here today. The agenda is to have a conversation, so everybody's view and everyone's perspective is welcome, and we can just talk about it. Okay, so this, just to let you know as well, this is being live streamed on Facebook. So it will be recorded, and you will be able to get a copy of the recording. We will either send it to you in the follow-up email, or you'll be able to go and watch it again on Facebook. just to let you know that as well. So if you don't want to be on camera, then please just switch your cameras off in case we go to gallery view at any point in time. Any questions from anybody at this point? No? Okay, awesome. Right, so we'll jump straight to the panel and ask the panel to introduce themselves. Usually I'd like to start with Chisom, as this is an initiative from Diversify, but I am going to ask Erik to start first. And Erik, could you introduce yourself to us today? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Erik from southern Norway, Kristiansand. Straight after college, when I was 19, I moved to Manchester and actually lived in the UK for 15 years and came back to Norway in 2014. I've been involved in what we call outplacement services. So when companies gone to make redundancies, particularly in the oil and gas sector, a few years back, we were kind of assisting people with typical higher education, long experience in relation to getting their next job. January 2019, I started a company called Avant-Garde Search. We claim to be the driver for more modern and agile recruitment services, and we work within the technology sector in Oslo and Stavanger. And so far, so good. And I've been involved with a Diversify event before. Very pleased to be able to join now, and hopefully I can share some ideas or tips or experiences.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Erik. Roy, can we come to you and ask you to introduce yourself? You're on mute at the moment.
Hi, I am Roy Hansen. I'm Norwegian. I'm 54 years old. I've been mainly working within sales, marketing internationally, and also technology. I've been part of the tech startup scene in Norway since '95, and I guess I kind of make out some of the numbers here, being in my 50s and white. But I know that also that there's some interest in some of the things that I've been very keen to discuss in the past years. I've always been interested in how the human brain works, because I've been working with sales and understanding the psychology of humans. I was always very interested in politics, and it kind of accelerated quite a lot over the past 10 years, my interest in this. And I started reading up on neuroscience, and I started reading up on evolutionary biology, because the trends in the world today, as we have seen lately, is that factual knowledge has become less important than emotions. So I wanted to understand, why was this happening? Why do people trump facts with emotions? Because if you want to go down and analyze the challenges that we have in the world, which is one of the challenges we're going to discuss today, you need to, in my opinion, understand the building blocks that creates this. And this is what things I've been heavily involved in lately, through a couple of other organizations that I'm working with, trying to understand and trying to find ways of making people follow facts instead of emotions when they do things. And this has made me drill quite deep into the human brain. And one of the things you find in the human brain, of course, is the unconscious bias tendencies that we have, and trying to understand, why do we have them? How can we do something about them? Because in the end of the day, I, as probably all the others here, would like a society where we all have the equal opportunity to get the kind of jobs we want, and to follow the kind of dreams we want to follow. So that's kind of my way in here. I'm in no way a scientist in any of this, but keen enthusiast in the field. And I spent a bit of time reading up on the field long before this became a reality, and I was asked to participate here, and hopefully some of the things I say can make some sense to some of you people.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Roy. Thank you. And Chisom, will round off with you. This is an initiative by Diversify, and Chisom is the founder, but could you continue and do an introduction? Thank you.
Hi, y'all. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am Nigerian. I spent a significant part of my life in the US, and I have been in Europe over the past 11 years now. I am an economist by training and profession, and I work primarily as this, but I'm also the founder of Diversify and Herspace. Diversify is an organization that works to advocate for a better and more inclusive society across professional development, mental health and wellness, community building for everyone. So yeah, happy to be here. Diversity and inclusion in the workplace is an initiative that we started running in December of last year. Hyacinth and I and my team, we have many conversations about diversity and the state of the world, and we always ask ourselves, what can we do about it? So this series that happens monthly is one of the ways we thought we could contribute to a more inclusive workplace, because that affects, people's identity, people's well-being, how people interact with their environment and the society in which they exist. So yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I want to say thank you for everyone for being here, for taking the time out of your day in Corona times to stare yet at another screen and listen to us. So really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chisom. Thank you. So that's our speakers for today. I am really excited to get going with this conversation. Unconscious bias, one of those subjects that gets us all going in some way or another. So the first question that I'd like to ask the panel today, I'm going to ask this of all of you, but I'll start with Erik. What does unconscious bias mean to you?
Well,
what is it?
I suppose it means it can mean many things, but for me personally, what strikes my mind when I hear the word or think about it or we discuss it is selecting people, or perhaps things as well, but mainly people, maybe people or animals, based on feelings or emotions, but actually also based on fear or fear for the new, or fear for something that we're not used to. So when we select candidates, or anyone who selects candidates, could it be that in the back of their head, they fear that someone that's Nigerian will not perform as well as the Norwegian? Or will it be because they fear that if we hired a Somalian, which we did with Fatia, could some people have in the back of their mind that Fatia won't be able to reach out as well to companies who could be our customers, because we fear that people higher up the business chain could maybe not be as open to people with a different background. So if we just go on, in general, on our gut feeling and emotion, or what we feel is safest, that's unconscious bias to me.
Okay, thank you so much, Erik. Chisom, can we come to you and ask you what your meaning of unconscious bias is? Your understanding?
Okay, thanks. Unconscious bias, what it means to me, I think just down to the basic definition, it is something that occurs when social stereotypes about particular people or groups of people influences a person's judgments without them being fully aware or realizing it. So since we're talking about unconscious bias within the frame of the workplace, most organizations and teams have unconscious assumptions about different social and identity groups. These assumptions often depend on the individual's background, social environment and personal experiences. Also, unconscious bias is often used interchangeably as implicit bias because they are fundamental attitudes and stereotypes that people automatically and unintentionally, attribute to a person or group of people that impacts how we then understand, appreciate, interact, or engage with them. So I guess if I were to leave people with just one definition, it'd be that unconscious bias or implicit bias functions and is activated outside of a person's awareness. And it can actually be in direct contradiction to what you believe, what you value, or the cause that you promote or advocate. And this is what makes it so dangerous, because it has a way of involuntarily showing up and affecting your behavior outside of your full awareness. So this would be my definition of it.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. And Roy, yourself, your definition. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the other two have covered quite a bit of ground on the definition of what it can be. So I want to take one step further back, and again, we try to look into the evolution of the human brain. Why do we have it? Can we do anything about it? So basically, the brain is, we actually have two brains. We have the old brain, and this is the brain is kind of what they call the reptile brain, and then we have the more thinking brain. And as Chisom says, like, these are not always they don't always agree, because you have your values and your ideas in the thinking part, while you have your biases in the unconscious part of the brain. So it very often comes to a battle between the two. And how many times haven't all of us suddenly realized that, oh, fuck, I treated that person really bad, and I wasn't aware of it until 3 seconds later, and it totally contradicts what I really believe in. We have all had that situation. And what I want to maybe, I like to use allegories in things. And to me, the unconscious bias is part of the operating system of the human brain, while the, implicit or unconscious bias, while the explicit or conscious biases are more plugins that you can add to your operating system, or you cannot. And in this is like, when you are aware that you are treating people differently and you still do it, that is an option you have. That is your choice. But if the first unconscious idea you get into your head, that is not necessarily a choice. You can train your brain into being aware of it, and being very aware of it, especially when it comes to hiring people. You should know where it can kick in. So, but our brain basically is not made for making the right decision. It's made for make a quick decision that keeps us alive. That's who we are. We are still primates, basically adapted to a life in the savannah in Eastern Africa. That's basically where our brain was evolved. And the modern society, where we actually have the time to sit down and collect the data, that is a new situation for humans, and we struggle to adapt to that situation. That's why we make a lot of, we have glitches in the brain that is not adapted to the modern world. It is still cheating us a bit. So
thank you, Roy. Thank you. So I'm going to interrupt a little bit to cut you off, because we just wanted the definition. So thank you. I was going to ask, I'm going to come to the audience. Do you agree with what you've heard so far? Does anybody else have another definition? Thank you to Kevin for your definition that you've put in the comments. Thank you guys, this is really quick. We have quite a lot of questions that we need to get through, so I'm just gonna task the panelists with being as succinct with your answers as possible, just because we really do want to get to the Q&A session with the participants as well. So thank you so much, guys. Chisom, I'm going to come back to you. So you mentioned unconscious and implicit bias. Is there a difference, and how do they each manifest?
Thanks, Hyacinth. I'm going to try to keep this brief, but you know me. Okay, so the difference between unconscious and implicit bias and how they manifest. Okay, so the difference, I think, is quite subtle. For things that are non-contextual, I think it's always great to go back to the basics. So what do they mean in English? So if you think about synonyms for unconscious, it's unaware, unknown, ignorant, oblivious. So which basically means that you do not know about something. On the other hand, if you think about synonyms for implicit, it's basically understood, implied, unspoken, inherent, or contained. So in this case, it refers to something that is suggested or implied, but actually not said. So an example would be when your partner gives you a dirty look for not putting the toilet seat down, or when you get that look from your parents when you do or say something you're not supposed to. So unconscious bias refers to bias, like I said, that is that we are unaware of. So it happens outside of our control, whereas implicit bias is dancing around the same boundaries as a conscious bias, but it questions the extent to which these biases are actually unconscious, especially when we are gradually becoming aware of it. So how does it manifest? I think that it is important to understand that we process people's ethnicity, gender, race, disability in a matter of seconds, you know, before we even know that we've done it. And at the same time, we attached all the preconceived knowledge we have in, you know, the box that we have labeled people in. So these preconceived notions and stereotypes often form societal assumptions that are based on nurture, so how we were raised and the environments in which we grew up. So in the workplace, how it can manifest is in, say, for example, like Erik said, when you're hiring based on gut feeling. So biases can take different form. I think there are over 10. So I'm going to just mention a few. Affinity bias is when you hire for culture fit rather than cultural contribution. Conformity bias is when your hiring team, you know, meets to discuss an application, and then one person on the team is unconsciously forced or even consciously forced to shift their opinion of a candidate to match the majority. So this basically means peer pressure. Another type of bias that happens is confirmation bias. This is quite disadvantageous. It manifests in, say, judging people already based on their CV, their name, their gender, where they come from, the university they go to, their address, because it tells you where they live. And the last one I would mention is halo effect, which basically kind of makes you like this big deal, you know, halo, because it shows up during the hiring process when you place people on a pedestal because they worked at a really great firm, or they went to an Ivy League or a top university. So these are some of the ways they can manifest.
Lovely, thank you very much. Alina, just want to say thank you. You're viewing on Facebook and you gave us your definition as well. Unconscious bias can also be a result of exposure to certain cultures or social beliefs. Thank you. So if you're watching on Facebook here, please join in the conversation. We are seeing your comments and we welcome your participation in this event as well. So Roy, coming back to you, you did touch on a scientific or biological explanation of why bias exists. And just very briefly, can I just ask you to solidify what it was that you was explaining to us there, the reason why bias exists?
Well, Chisom kind of touched into it. We make, I think, I read somewhere that we unconsciously we have the capacity of making 1.2 million assessments per second. So we kind of scan everything around us all the time, and we are analyzing it very, very fast. And this is what happened when we also meet some new people. And historically, meeting new people means maybe there is a change coming, maybe there is a danger coming. So our first reaction to meeting someone that is different is that, no, there's a red flag here. I don't really want to go down this way. And this is historically the way the human brain has kept us alive. And we didn't end up like the Neanderthals and the Homo erectus and the Denisovus. We are still on this planet because we have had a very good system for keeping ourselves alive. And this is hardly rooted into the brain. And it's one of the major things here is the flight mode hits very fast because it has to. Historically, we have been, the only way we could survive is to be able to get away from a situation fast. And evolutionary, we are actually the descendants of the cowards who climbed up in the tree whenever the brain told us there was something dangerous happening. We are not the descendants of those who went out in the grass to find out what the sound they heard was. And in this lays, the intuition part of our survival system, and this is where it all stems from, actually. So yeah, so it's in us. It's in our evolutionary system, and but we are smart enough to be aware of it, and we are smart enough to find the right solutions for making it not important in the job we do or in the life we have.
Yes, okay. So just taking into account what you've all said so far about unconscious bias, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's how we interpret it and how we use it and impact others. So Chisom, this whole series is about diversity and equality in the workplace. So just taking it back and looking at the workplace, what do you think about the biological disposition for unconscious bias?
So I think that Roy makes some great points about, us being somewhat, I guess, at the mercy of biases. So what do I think about the biological disposition for unconscious bias? I think, yes, there is. I think, this is a very basis for us versus them, the narrative around that. It ties to identity and how we identify with one group over the other. So it can be something as basic as gender, skin color, sexuality, race, or extending to more intricate constructs around society, like nationality, social class, religious, and political beliefs. Now, to find these similarities and differences with others, our brains must first perceive its own identity as the self. So as human beings, we are quick to draw these correlations and comparisons with ourselves. That person is like me or that person is not like me. And there's inherently nothing wrong with this type of bias because they are based on fact. Now, I can't say I am a woman and Hyacinth is a woman. And for this reason, we are a we or we are an us. And that is okay because it's based on fact. However, where this argument about being biologically vulnerable or just like predisposed to this becomes dangerous is that this type of bias that we're talking about with regards to unconscious bias are not based on facts. And oftentimes, if left unchecked, they become very dangerous. So this type of bias can build into structures and lead to Black men being murdered in broad daylight with little or no repercussions. It can lead to a few women or minority groups ascending in leadership positions, or women being paid significantly lower than their male counterparts, or people with different names not being able to get jobs that matches their skills. So I definitely think that, yes, while we have a biological disposition for bias, we as human beings are actually not born with any type of unconscious bias that makes us discriminate against one group, gender, or others. These are things that we learn. These are things that we collect through our lives, through our experiences, through how we are raised, and how they eventually show up in the workplace.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Chisom. And Erik, coming to you, working in recruitment, what's been your experience, or how have you seen bias manifest in the workplace, both through your recruitment experience and your wider experience in the workplace?
Thanks. I mean, if I use it, I think specifically to Norwegian society, when I lived in England, that's where I started my career and kind of had my first 12 years in my career within recruitment, both in terms of recruiting people for candidates, for clients and for companies, but as a director in the UK, I recruited a lot of people for ourselves as well. And I was quite shocked when I moved back to Norway, how unconscious bias in relation to recruitment, in relation to internal promotion in companies, and in general, I suppose, as well, how much more of it there was here than what I experienced in the UK. So, in my team in the UK, I think I was director for 80 people at the end. There was probably, I don't know, 30 of them had a foreign name. Typically in England, there would be a lot from Pakistani name, Indian name, etc. Probably 20 of them were Black. 5 of them were gay. But it was nothing, we didn't even think of it. And even myself, when you come back to Norway, society, newspapers, social media, they even get me to think about it here. Even though I'm, you all know I'm totally against it, but society and they pack it on us to, it's impossible not to think in an unconscious mind. But thankfully, when it comes to recruitment or how you treat internal staff, etc., you see sense very quickly. But I spoke to a client of mine earlier. She's Norwegian born, but her background is of her parents from India. And I said, if you and me saw 5 applicants and we had 3 minutes to look at them, and there was 4 foreign names and 1 Norwegian name, who would we look at first? And automatically you go to the person called Kari-Olsen. But you kind of manage to stop yourself and say, shit, Erik, what the hell are you doing here? Or sorry, what are you doing here? But it was never like that in England. So I in a way feel I blame but politicians, media, social media, culture, commentary field, not least, for actually making me more unconscious bias towards any area where there can be discrimination. And I read, so I'm still in shock how different it is for me. I don't know if you experienced the same, Hyacinth, but I felt at least that in terms of names, race, and sexuality, it was never an issue in England.
Yeah,
in my field.
Thank you actually for admitting that, due to societal pressure and due to the differences between the practices in one country and another, you have felt that pressure to act with bias in your work practices. So just to expound upon what you were saying there, do you think that unconscious bias leads to the facilitation of discrimination in the workplace? So you're saying yes, in recruitment practices, but do you also think that it leads to the facilitation of discrimination in the actual workplace?
Yeah, and I think I must just to make sure that I manage to, we don't discriminate, but it's that initial thing that comes into the head. But thankfully, our company and my people, we know well enough that it's not right to do. But it's important for me to say that, or be honest and say that it comes into your mind initially. But back to your question, yes, absolutely. I think for me, the biggest area of discrimination is in actually hiring people. But if you look further in terms of internal promotions, what opportunities you get internally, I think it exists to some extent. I don't know, we talked a bit about this last week. We kind of disagreed on the numbers, but I know at least in my company in the UK, if you looked at the management, it was a very healthy mix of women, people from a different race and people with a foreign name. And I know in the FTSE 100, you said that wasn't the case, but at least in my company there was. And I think, thankfully, within the sector I work in, with like the likes of Kahoot and Cognite and Airthings and Spaceworks and stuff, all these technology companies, it's kind of the opposite. It's actually positive being a foreigner, foreign name, a different race, gay, whatever it may be. But the rest of the business world in Norway, I suppose, like more traditional industries like banking, shipping, finance, etc., I'm worried that they still have a long way to go. And I think in these type of companies, also these communication agencies, I think you get further if you're white and called Lisa than being black and called Hamilton.
Yeah.
And I think I also spoke to someone just before because I wanted to get a perspective of what it's like for an American that's white with a very, she called it white name. I said, have you experienced any unconscious bias towards you in Norway? And she said just clearly, no. But I have friends, and she mentioned I have an American friend called Hamilton, and she said that's often associated with a black person, which he is. And she said he's really struggled.
No.
But her race, being white and having a white name, as she said, not made any difference to her. But all her friends that are different races, different cultures, struggles. And that also includes in terms of moving up in a company or getting new opportunities with it.
Yes, well, thank you for your honesty, Erik. Thank you to everybody who has joined us. We got started, and for those who have joined us a little bit late, you are hearing from the panel. Erik Falk Hansen works within recruitment. Roy Hansen is joining us as a member of a society of community of society who is a part of a demographic that has been accused of being quite biased, and so we brought Roy in as a community member. Chisom is she's the owner and founder of Diversify, that is rolling out this initiative, diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So that's just a quick catch up for those of you who've joined us a little bit late. We have some comments here from a couple of people. Thank you very much, Sonia. Sonia says that biases are the stories that we tell about people before we know who they are. That's quite interesting. We tend to change our bias once we know who people are. And Kevin is saying research and experience suggests personal bias becomes a practice, becomes a policy, so it becomes systemic and then recreates bias on a personal level, which is quite right. I've seen a few of you have your cameras on, that you've been nodding throughout, agreeing with quite a lot of what the panelists have been saying. So Roy, I'd just like to come back to you and ask you, would you say that you have noticed bias first in yourself and in others?
Of course.
You become aware of that.
Yeah, as I said, sometimes it goes 3 seconds and then you realize that you did something that you shouldn't have done, that is against the values that you have, but we all do it. I can tell a story. short one. This is 2 days after 9/11. I was traveling to Copenhagen from Oslo, and I came into the train, and this I would presume he was Arab. He looked Arab, and he had taken the same clothes that he would wear to the mosque on Friday on himself, and he had a big bag with him, and he sat down next to me on the on the train, and I was like, whoops. And I reacted, and I got very fast aware of this is an irrational reaction from me, for me to have, but it was still there, based on what just happened. And I've kind of, after 10 minutes, of course, I felt quite ashamed that I reacted in the way I reacted, but it's, that was me. And you see it all the time. I enter quite a lot of discussions with people, and a lot of times, I mean, I see Andy is here, and me and Andy have shared quite a few discussions, and we also very often end up talking to other people, and then you kind of notice that they have opinions based on this their unconscious bias. So it kind of comes up in any conversation. I mean, we have all discussed politics, especially the last months with they stole the election and everything, and you end up discussing with a lot of people who have ideas in their head that seems to be hard coded into their system, because this is just the way their brain reacts. I mean, we all have discussions with anti-vaxxers, probably, hopefully non-flat earthers, but there are a few of them out there. And then you also have people talking the same way about other people, and you kind of pick up on it on a daily basis. As soon as you start talking to people, you notice that everybody.
Yes, we do. That's quite true.
Yeah, it's like Chisom says, like we all have the tendency of thinking us and them, and then we don't. When we talk about them, we never bother to actually check if them was actually, what does that them actually mean? Is that because we see people in groups, we don't see people in individuals. This is part of the system. We are group thinkers and not individual thinkers, and so instead of analyzing the person in front of us, we actually put them in as suggested, you put them in a group, and then you know something about that group that is positive or negative or whatever, and then you go with that. And I had a lot of discussions with people, and it's quite easy to see when you're aware of the way people are actually thinking.
Yeah, that's quite true. Thank you for all the questions that are coming through. Please keep sending your questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so thank you. Please keep sending your questions through. Now, I like the story that you just told us, Roy, and thank you again for your honesty of how you reacted to that person right after a very big traumatic event, which was 9/11. So I'm going to ask the audience for your participation here as well. How many of you would be honest enough to own up and say, have you ever reacted to somebody based on a big traumatic experience and then realize that you've got bias? If you have, do a reaction, hold your hand up if you've got your camera on, or react with the hand. So we can see quite a lot of people there. Thank you again for your honesty. And great, thank you so much, guys. I think it's so important as well with these conversations that we can be honest, because it's through honesty that we can shine a light and bring about change. So thank you all. So going back to the questions that I prepared for the panel, Chisom, I'm going to come back to you now. How do we bring it back to the workplace? Okay, how do we get the entire company, especially the leadership team, to address their unconscious biases when designing projects that center around diversity?
Thanks, Hyacinth. So I think that from my experience of working directly with companies and talking to them within my work around DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, oftentimes, companies chalk diversity to a numbers game. And it is, when we're just looking at diversity, it's a metrics, but how does that translate across, your diversity initiative? That is actually quite intricate. So like I said, diversity is a numbers game, as we know, who's in the room, where they are from, their age, their ethnicity, perspective, gender, and the like. But it does not exist in a vacuum. When you commit to start working on diversity, you should also look at inclusion, equity, and belonging, because it's important. So if you're new to the topic and you don't bathe in D&I conversations like people like me and Hyacinth do, then it's a good place to start with a training, bringing consultants, bringing experts and thought leaders, to work with you on those projects so that you do not ignore a large group of people. So how to address unconscious bias in leadership, or say as a hiring manager, I think as a primary basic requirement, educate yourself, arm yourself with the facts and tools to be able to smash bias. Previously, I spoke a bit about a few types of bias and how they arise. So I'm gonna revisit them in terms of this is how you can make a change. So you can also leave this with like what you can do today. So I think I mentioned affinity bias. This is where you hire for, culture fit as opposed to culture add or contribution. So how you can mitigate an affinity bias, for example, is to, when you meet someone and you're about to hire them or you're interviewing them, actively take note of the similarities that you share with the candidates. So you can differentiate between the characteristics that might actually influence your judgment and the actual skills, the unique attributes, the qualities, the experience that they can bring to your team and that they can add to, to the growth of your company. So I think I also mentioned conformity bias. This is the peer pressure where people are forced to, follow the majority. If they're the last to speak and 5 people before them say, yeah, I don't like that guy, then they feel like, okay, I need to say I don't like that guy too. Now, one of the ways to address this in your work is, have right after the interview, have the people who the hiring team actively just to write their opinions immediately after the interview without discussing with anybody else. Then your team can come together and you can review what it is they have written, because this way you get to hear their impartial opinions without the added challenge of peer pressure. And of course, I think I also mentioned confirmation bias. This is what happens, when we judge people based on their CV, their names, where they went to school. So one of the ways to reduce this is, I think it's really important, especially in recruitment, to ask standardized, skill-based questions. So this way you can interview or you can assess an interviewee with a fair chance to see how they stand out against the others, and this will also stop your team from asking too many impromptu questions that might actually lead to more confirmation bias. So there are 3 things you can do today to actually get the ball rolling.
Okay, thank you so much. So Erik, coming back to you with recruitment, just want to encourage you guys. There's been a couple of comments. So Sonia said, I think these stories are really important in a recruitment setup, Erik, that you were talking about earlier. And Kay said, thanks, Erik, for being honest about the fact that you experience unconscious bias and you are continuously training yourself to stop and shift your mindset immediately. So going back to recruitment, Chisom's just given some tips from her perspective as a hiring manager and company owner. From a recruitment perspective, what might companies do to avoid common unconscious bias in the hiring process? So for example, as you mentioned earlier, sidelining applications. So what are your tips from a recruitment perspective?
I think Chisom had some really good points. You stole some of the things I was going to say, Chisom. So thanks for that. No, very valid points. I think just as a general overall thing, I think it's important for the company to really get it into the backbone of all the staff that we are not doing any form of discrimination, but not just saying they are, but it's something that just needs to be right within, so people don't think about it at all, if that's possible. But I spoke to my colleague yesterday, Arne, who's done a master degree in this. So if he's listening, I can give him some credit for what I'm going to answer now. But like he said, it's to have the right attitude and focus on the questions that actually gives answers. So instead of thinking, letting your emotions run loose, it's about sitting down and thinking, what do I know about this person? And then I can be more focused on the conscious side of things. So what is concrete, what is fixed, what project has she or he worked on, what qualifications have they had? So it's a bit like Chisom said, very specific things that has nothing to do with race, gender, whatever it may be. And although I'm generally against like having typical structured interview questions, there are two areas where I like to have it, and that's when it comes to cultural fit and to avoid falling into the unconscious bias trap. There's some people suggesting that we could take off photos from CVs or nationality or age. I'm not sure if I made up my mind there yet, what's good or not. But that could also have an effect, particularly the photo on CV, like in America, they don't have it. I don't think it's allowed. And could that help? Yes, I think all those people get, the first thing we will look at is the photo. And we can all then start getting unconscious bias thought and think, oh, this person looks better than this one, or you know what I mean? So I don't think technical things we can do in terms of removing photo, age, etc. We can find that out as recruiters anyway. If I want to see what you look like, I'll go on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. If I want to see your age, I'll go to see when did you study? So I think it's more about getting specific questions and a bit more structure to the interviews. But that will only work if the whole organization is 100% behind diversity, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Funny that you mentioned that with CVs, because I've made a conscious decision. I have historically put my photo on my CV to be deliberate about who I am, so that there's no question. It removes some of the guesswork, but that was a deliberate decision that I made, and I'm sure some others may have done that here as well. But it's fun. Thank you for mentioning that. So Roy, coming back to you and thinking about society, you being Norwegian, middle-aged white man. So I'm going to ask you this from your privileged perspective of where you are. Being in Norway, from a society or societal or community perspective, would you say there is unconscious bias in the way that diversity is viewed and addressed in Norway? From your view on that, would you say so?
Well, I kind of been working mainly in the startup environment, and I think probably the startup environment is one of the areas where people look more about what kind of skills do the person have than who they are. So bigger organizations, I think, probably have more trouble in this field than startup environment. So I don't really have a lot of experience in working in big organizations where we try to diversify the workforce. But I'm pretty sure that from what we know, that there is a lot of it, and there's a lot of lack of awareness of the power of diversified workforces, because it's the science on that field is pretty clear. More ideas, better companies. More perspectives, better companies. It's been proven in several research projects that has been done. And I think that if you want to have someone like me, like I could have been probably a CEO of a medium-sized company or something like that, hiring 15 new people every year, making people like me who are in leading positions aware of the facts of diversity. I mean, it's probably lacking out there. It's probably lacking the understanding of the positive outcome for the companies to do this. And I think if you want to do the right thing, you have to learn from those who have made it happen, who have been successful in this. Startup environment, music, culture, sports. What is sports doing correctly that is working? Because they are extremely interested in creating the best team. They only look at skills. They don't look at skin color or cultural background, or if the person is good looking, or like you said, like it's a huge bias towards good looking people get better jobs and better pay. If you're a good football player, you're a good football player even if you're an ugly one. So look at, I think they need to look at those who have been successful to see. I mean, if you're a big company in Oslo, look at Vålerenga, the football team of Vålerenga, and how they are doing. So I think there's a lot to learn from that. And I think if I might throw in one thing here, it's not really part of the question, but it's an idea sorry, the light went off here. It's an idea that maybe we should look more and see people in a work process before we hire people. I know this is difficult to do with Norwegian employment laws, but it is definitely some idea that you should think about, is that why don't we just bring people in and let them, compare the way they do the job? Because basically what you, Erik, you guys, what you want is to find the perfect candidate for the job you are trying to fill.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Interesting comment actually from Kevin regarding what Erik was just saying about blind interviews. Kevin has said that blind orchestra auditions increase women in orchestras from 25% to over 46% in 10 years. Now that's a staggering number right there. So thank you so much for that information, Kevin. Chisom, coming back to you. What is tokenism and how do we avoid tokenism in the workplace when implementing a D&I strategy?
Thanks, Hyacinth. I wanted to just make a quick comment to Roy's question because I think it's an important question as to how diversity manifests in the workplace or society in Norway. My honest to God opinion on this is it's based on gender. It's based on women. Usually a lot of Norwegian companies are super proud of themselves for, and as they should be, by the way, because I think they're leading most other countries, they're leading among many countries in the world in terms of they look at how diverse is the company and how many women are on boards or in leadership teams. However, that is where it ends. It does not consider the intersectionalities, because when you look at the women in the company, oftentimes they are white. It doesn't look at, ethnicity, race, religion. All these other intersectionalities within gender is actually not considered. So because they are not quite explicit in describing what does gender diversity actually mean, besides identifying yourself as cisgender female, where does non-binary people fit? Where do transgender people fit? So that is something that should be investigated in Norway, because there is such a huge gap. Now to your question, it was, yes.
Can I just add an example? It was really good. Just going to give a quick example. We we normally work with smaller companies, but because before Christmas, we were invited to provide a tender for recruitment for a big Norwegian company. And, you know, it's a long tender process, a big questionnaire, etc., etc. And there must have been probably 20 questions about gender and how we recruit women and men and the differentiation, which was really good. But that's where, like you said, that's where it stopped. So it's great that you start one place and focus, you know, they focus on the gender, but it was so clear that that's all we really care about. You know, it was kind of like, yeah, great with women, screw the rest kind of thing. So you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we daily experience.
Thanks, Erik. I think, Hyacinth, your question was about tokenism.
Yeah, so what is tokenism for, you know, the participants here that might not understand what that is? And how do we avoid tokenism when rolling out a D&I policy?
Okay, so tokenism is the practice of making only a symbolic effort to be inclusive, especially by recruiting people from an underrepresented group in order to prevent criticism and to give the appearance of fairness in terms of racial or gender equality within a company. But I should say that the good news here is that a lot of companies are actually beginning to understand that diversity and inclusion in recruitment and in the workplace is not a sprint, but a marathon. It takes time and conscious efforts to implement. And companies who know this continue to work towards it should be applauded. It is not an easy task, but it is a mandatory one. The beauty in diversity it is really about consistently making efforts to include people across all groups, especially underrepresented groups. But it is not a checklist item, which is what tokenism is. So there are some companies who are doing it wrong, and I just want to describe what that would look like. Companies that try to appear as though they understand the complexity of DEIB by saying something about it or by using stock photos on their websites to reflect diversity, when in fact, they aren't doing anything. So by the way, just aside, stock photos should actually represent people currently in your company. People are not stupid or blind, so stop insulting us. You know, a simple LinkedIn search can show who is actually employed at your company and what positions they hold. Some companies actually also have their team page. And then it's really kind of like mind-blowing to go, oh, there were all these diverse and, you know, people with disabilities on your cover page, but look at that team. It's like one type of people, right? So basically what I'm saying here is that people with disabilities, people of color, women or minority groups should not be in your website or promotional material if your workforce does not actually reflect them. So to avoid tokenism in the workplace, it requires a lot of understanding, knowledge, education, emotional intelligence, and with a large dose of humility. I say humility because it is a constant process of learning, unlearning, and improving. So to answer your question directly, tokenism can be avoided. It's really about engaging in the whole process and being honest about your knowledge or the lack thereof. You know, where needed, seek professional help to make diverse and inclusive recruitment decisions based on facts. Or even when you're designing projects that should center diversity and inclusion, make sure you involve experts from the onset to ensure that you cover all your bases. So some tips to avoid it, I will list two. First, it is really important that you check your intentions. My go-to on this is asking myself, is everyone in the room? So we know the parameters for diversity. We know age, ethnicity, race, gender. Ask yourself, are people who are supposed to be here, are they sitting around the table? Diversity and inclusion should consistently be demonstrated in your work, your brand, the language that you use, the content that you put out, your network, your partners, your clients, and the businesses that you engage or support. You should always be working on this. It's like an ongoing process as a company, as an individual. Not only when you hire a Muslim woman who wears the hijab, her hijab at work, or when your son brings home somebody from a different race, or when you have a grandchild who happens to be from a different race. And then the second is take responsibility. I think one of the things I say, you know, to leaders when I talk to them about this is that you're a human being, you will mess up. I mess up all the time and I'm learning consciously, you know, so, but it is your business and your personal responsibility to make sure that the staff and consumers from a different variety of backgrounds feel welcome and safe. It is also your responsibility to ensure that your business is addressing and investing in diversity, you know, investing in research and expanding your network, you know, to bring in consultants if you need support in this area. But also be reminded that you're human. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to put your foot in your mouth. Take responsibility and say, hey, I messed up. You know what? Turns out I'm human after all. And then just invest in the continuous learning and apologize when you hurt people's feelings. So that would be this is what tokenism is, and this is how 2 ways you can prevent it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Chisom. So eloquently put there. Thank you. So thank you, everybody, for your engagement. We have around 20 minutes left of panel questions, and then we're coming to the audience. So Sabrina, Kirti, Carmen, Nelly, Yuta, Maria, Sonia, thank you for your questions. We are coming to you in 20 minutes. We're going to start the Q&A session. Okay, so 20 more minutes. Roy and Chisom, I'm coming to both of you for this question. As much as it's necessary to address unconscious biases, how do we address unconscious bias that have been planted into systemic structures? And let's maybe focus here in Norway.
What do you mean by planted into systemic structure?
Well, when we think about the educational system, for example, where you know, as a foreigner that's come here, and Chisom's had the same experience and many of the other foreigners learning Norwegian, and the books that we get to read talk about foreigners, they're represented as only having menial jobs. So you have the Norwegian who's the pilot or the high-flying person, and then you'll have the foreigner that is represented as a cleaner or somebody that's just working in a nursery and very low socioeconomic jobs. And that seems to be quite commonplace in the educational system, not just here. It's quite apparent that it's a worldwide thing, that the educational system is not reflecting true history. So that's an example of societal bias.
Can I also add to that on the topic of learning Norwegian, because, you know, I have 6 Norwegian textbooks to learn Norwegian, and exactly, you know, Hyacinth and I will talk about this, you know, every time I find another example, it drives me crazy. But in addition to what Hyacinth said, I think one of the things to point out here is that oftentimes in those scenarios where that is created in the books, the immigrants will say something like, oh, in Syria, I was a chemist or a physicist, but now I'm washing dishes, or I work at the Barnehagen and I am so happy. And you're just thinking, what are you trying to sell? Because this is not working. So just adding that here.
Yeah, I would say that this is probably more conscious bias than unconscious bias, but a problem nevertheless. Obviously, if you, this might be the difference between the private sector and the public sector. This is a public sector way of doing things. They never ask the clients, what kind of product do you want? Obviously, the people who should be writing those books should use people like Chisom and other people who have gone through the training. How is our product? What can we change about it to make it better? I guess that question has never been asked. I mean, if you send a support message to Apple, they always send a questionnaire back and say, how was the experience? What can be better, and so on and so on and so on. So you have companies improving their services all the time because they actually ask the audience, what was this good? Can it be better? What is your suggestion for making it better? And this is, I would say, this is like your example is down to incompetence in the public sector. And basically that's it.
Okay.
You are going to make people feel welcomed in Norway. You need to have material that is actually showing what Norway is today and not what it was in the 1950s.
So if I could also answer that question, Hyacinth, I think that it goes a little bit beyond incompetence, because incompetence, you can train employees or people to, acquire the skills. And I think I might have it wrong, but I think, Hyacinth, it was about structures, right, that are created. So when we look at, structural discrimination, systemic racism, things of that nature. So I think, because your question was, is it necessary to address it? And how might we even begin to address it? So I would say, honestly, quite simply, educate yourself. Knowledge is power. First, you must learn about the structures and how they show up. So this is one example in the textbooks. I have examples for how they show up in healthcare. And of course, right now we're censoring Norway, but this happens in the US, it happens in the UK, it happens everywhere, So learn about, these structures and how they show up. There are a lot of structures that have been put in place to facilitate, not to facilitate, but they facilitate the unconscious biases that we have because we're unaware of them. And you can see this in healthcare, industry, social security, employment, police, and even the legal systems. Some of these implicit biases, because you start becoming aware of them, can lead to the loss of life or murder, as we have seen in recent times. So depending on the context and the country, if you are in a majority group, for example, on the basis of gender, ethnicity, race, religion, you might not know about it. So it is really important to listen to the people who go through the challenges, and it is likely not in their heads and they are not overthinking it. Just listen to them, hear them, and know that they are not making mountains out of a molehill. So to address systemic structures in society, we need to take it once again to the leaders. It has to be more than just talk or dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue going on in Norway, but actionable processes, I'm still waiting, so they need to be implemented. Policies have to be etched into existence and law. And in some cases, make it illegal or inhumane to continue certain practices. I mean, look at in the US, many years ago, women couldn't even own bank accounts without their husbands, for example. So you need to put things into law. It can no longer be, business as usual or nice to have. It needs to be a need to have. Social, political, and economic systems must also invest in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging training so that they can create more inclusive structures and eradicate loopholes and blind spots. And again, I think another thing should be that states should actively support organizations and companies that work in these areas, because this way they can amplify their work. So that would be how can we identify the structures and how can we, start doing something about them?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, you mentioned there about women in the States not being able to buy property. And I think that was in quite a lot of countries because it's not so far back, my mother couldn't buy a property without my father signing. I think that law changed in the late 70s or in the 80s. So it's not that such a long time ago that some of these policies were changed. So
can I make a comment on this?
Yeah, sure.
So because this goes, as Chisom says, it's like it goes on the level of knowledge among the people who are supposed to create the rules for how society should be.
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen a shift in the past 10 years from people like me making the rules to people with social studies coming out of universities very lately. And we know a lot of these people have had an educational system that has given them a more identity politic view of the world. So we've gone from one wrong, and now it seems like we're going into the other wrong. So this is my personal opinion. Someone grown up needs to be involved in creating these policies, because what we are talking about here, I come from a small fishing village in the north of Norway. This conversation would probably not even be possible up there. And you definitely get a lot of very strange comments on things. And we are lucky to sit in Oslo and have this conversation, because here you have a lot of people who actually think about this and are involved in this. But when you go out in the broader society, what we are talking about here is something they've heard about, but yeah, there is an old saying in a song, a Norwegian song from a very famous Norwegian singer. It says like, there is a rumor that the earth is round, but we don't believe in everything in this town. And there's some truth to that this knowledge that needs to go out into the wider society, because you can make the rules here and then you say, okay, this is the rules. But then in practical, when you go to my place in my hometown, you will have a lot of people who don't understand why should this be new rules. So you have to take this into perspective as well. Anyway, that was just my comment.
Sure, thank you. That was a very valid comment. It's also a generational issue as well, because, you know, when we look at that, and you're saying it was geographical, but it's a generational issue as well. So we're going to start winding down now. I've got one or two, depending on how long the answers are from the panelists, one or two last questions. Just come to a comment from Andy. It says, Roy mentioned conscious bias, which I think is a very important point, specifically how persons with conscious biases use unconscious bias as a means to disguise an agenda. Oh, thank you, Andy. That's very true. That happens quite often. So Erik, I'm going to come to you now. Going back to the workplace, going back to recruitment, and I'd just like to ask you, from your perspective, is the culture fit condition for hiring a candidate a way of ignoring bias in workplace culture?
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick comment. I didn't want to break in when you talked, Roy, and I think, of course, the awareness in small fishing villages or in the Bible Belt where I'm from, etc., is obviously not at a level where we are in Oslo. But I think it's a bit unfair. There are massive problems in Oslo. The awareness in regards to what we're discussing here is huge here as well, and particularly people without putting, those people that are from abroad or black or gay or whatever it may be, they'll experience this. So and I know you know that as well, but we must realize that this is hot here as well, and a long way to go. But in terms of the cultural fit, I'm not sure if I understood the question right, but we obviously do cultural fit interviews type or cultural fit questions when we interview people both for ourselves or for our clients. But it's no good having cultural fit based interviews if the culture in the company isn't what it should be, because then we'll end up again, the cultural fit interview will then decide that this candidate, because she is a Muslim, is not right because she doesn't fit into our culture. So I think some people are very proud of saying, oh, we do this cultural fit to not discriminate, etc. But if the company is all men in their 60s, however good that interview is, they're not going to hire a Muslim 25-year-old woman. So people hide a bit behind this, and maybe that's a bit like what you said about tokenism. They think this is a great thing, but it doesn't matter if the culture is not like that. So I think it can be used in both ways, and I think there's only really any point having cultural fit interviews if you've got the right mindset in culture within your company. We did an interview last week with hopefully she gets the job. She has final interview tomorrow. She's from America, well, with Serbian parents, so she has a Serbian name, and she's come to Norway recently. And typically we need someone who speaks Norwegian. But we thought she impressed us so much, we thought we have an interview with her. And we did a cultural fit interview. And she kind of ticked all the boxes. And the positive thing with that was that we actually now in a position where we thought, screw the fact that she doesn't speak Norwegian. because she fitted in with everything else. So we decided that's much more important. But if our culture had been a conservative, old school culture with just loads of old men, you know, she would never have got through. So touch wood, she gets the job or accepts the job.
Yeah, I think that's why we have to shift away really from culture fit. Yes, Chisom, I'm going to round up this section with you. We've got 6 minutes left of this section. So I would like to ask you, what are the consequences in the workplace of unconscious bias, and why should we address it? What are the consequences?
I think we have touched on bits of it, but I would say consequences: lack of creativity. You would have a homogeneous employee pool. It affects employee engagement, and the minority people or groups in your company will probably not feel good about being there. So how can you address it? I think we have to be active and intentional in learning first, what are our blind spots? And can we get inputs from everyone who's involved or the people who should be in the room to see how we might solve this challenge? Because the thing about unconscious bias is that they're unconscious. You might not know that you have them, so you can waltz around and think, oh, I'm good. You know, like, I'm fine. I'm open to everybody. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, but you might inherently, unconsciously not be. So I think that one way to reduce it is to, or reducing unconscious bias in the workplace opens the door for many new possibilities, you know, for business growth, including creativity. You can also widen talent pool and job applications, because when you get a diverse pool of people, you also get new information and things to consider that you might not have previously considered, because you're not engaging with, you know, a diverse group. You're engaging with only people who are like you. And of course, greater employee engagement is really great because it leads to more profitability in the workplace. So how to address it? I think head on with, you know, humility and knowing that you will make mistakes, but actively trying to learn and really, you know, bring in experts to work you through it or to help your team through the initial phases, especially if you don't have anyone within your company who has the skill set or the capacity to push things along.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much, Chisom. Rounds that section off beautifully. Thank you so much. Always so eloquent and knowledgeable. So we're coming to the audience now, and all of you participants, thank you so much for your questions and comments. You've been really engaged, which is great. Unconscious bias is one of those topics that really, you know, promotes a conversation. So we're going to start with a question from Sabrina. And Sabrina's question is, I think this will be more directed to Chisom or Erik, please jump in. How can a workplace hold colleagues accountable for unconscious biases and sustainably disrupt current recruitment systems?
I saw that question. It's Chisom, do you want to go first, or should I come with some input?
It depends. Do you want me to say everything you want to say? I mean, I'm happy to start.
Steal my thunder. No, I think you can answer better than me.
Okay.
But then I can chip in with something if I have anything.
So the question is, how can a company hold employees accountable for unconscious bias, and how can they disrupt current practices in recruitment?
Yes.
A company cannot hold employees accountable for their unconscious bias. A company needs to create a culture that ensures that unconscious bias can, you know, be in check. And this starts with the leaders, because oftentimes the responsibility falls to middle level management, or, you know, people in analyst or associate role, but the responsibility is with the CEO and the board members and all of them. So the responsibility falls to them first, right? And then if you create a culture and you create policies and you practice them. So you don't just create them for show, because if you say, oh, I am a diversity champion, but you will not, people will tell. People can see that, including your employees. So if you have a culture and you practice it, then that way it automatically puts people in check, because they know that in this company, we do not stand for this. That's one way. Of course, there are different ways to unlock this. Now, to answer the other part, which is, what was the other part, Hyacinth? So it was how to...
how can they disrupt it?
So how can you disrupt it? So I think if we just look at recruitments, if you want to improve that process, then start from the beginning of recruitment. What type of language am I actually using in my job ads? I'm going to give a quick shout out to Shortcuts, because I recently saw a job ad that they put out, and I text, the HR director, because she's somebody I know and love, and I said, great job. It is the most inclusive so far ad that I have seen, because it accounted for quite a lot of people, even people who might not have the exact skill sets that they were looking for. So good work, keep up the good work, I guess. So basically, I guess what I would say here would be start from the initial stage. What type of wording are you using to attract potential talent pool? And then diversify your hiring process. This is a really good way to disrupt it. In Norway, people are usually used to hiring people who went to NHH, BI, Oslo University, NTNU, and the universities in Norway. So how might you refocus where you get your talent to include those schools? Because of course you don't want to discriminate against them, but you also want to include people who went to the University of Somalia, if there's a university like that, right? So another way is also to open up to a larger pool. Not everyone goes through the traditional educational system, so allow people in who might not necessarily have a Master's of Arts degree in finance, but might have skills over learned experience and professional experience that could fit that role. Also look across age. Another thing you could do is also bring in people who might have had a break in their career, because sometimes you look at job ads and you're just like, oh, I'm never going to win. You want 5 years in this role and 5 years in that role, or you must have worked concurrently through it all. Sometimes people take a break because they have kids, or they take a break because they're burnt out. So these are active ways you can actually disrupt your employment system, your recruitment system today.
Thank you, Chisom. Actually, I see myself reflecting in a lot of what you just said, because I am one of those people who didn't take a traditional educational route. I didn't actually go to university. But that doesn't mean that I'm not intelligent. In my last role, I went from project manager to CEO of the company within 10 months. So they were forward thinking enough to be very inclusive with myself, but also to they had courage to say, hey, we're going to hand over the reins to you because we see that you've got skills that we don't have. So that was a great tool. And also, yes, Erik, I was going to ask
2 comments, then we can do the last thing first. There is a problem. It's a really good idea, this, in terms of disruption, but there is a big problem. And it's too big. Well, nothing's too big of a problem, but for argument's sake, say that there's public sector. They're going to hire in a digital transformation manager. Public sector then says this needs to be one with a master degree. They say ideally from NTNU, BI, whatever. The consultancy company will then need to find Norwegian speaker with that education. They come to us as a recruiter and give us this criteria. So the people setting the standard, in this case, is actually the public sector, or technically the government. So it kind of comes from the top. I think a lot of people further down the chain would love to hire someone that's been out of work for 5 years or studied at University of Somalia or whatever it may be. People are desperate to give people chances. But it makes it quite hard if our customers, and thankfully they're not though, but if the customers are demanding that you ignore them people. I'm so pleased to be working within, with so many technology companies, because they kind of almost encourage us to dare to think a bit. But it's the ones that really look at themselves. And I think until they sort this out and become more flexible and more open, I don't know how many jobs are in public sectors in Norway. I mean, it's a quite high percentage. So I think that's where the root of the problem is. In terms of the first thing you said, Chisom, it needs to come from the top. I agree. But when I saw the question, I wrote a comment down, and it's more a question back to everyone. Could it also be that it could come from the bottom? Could actually employees, particularly in the smallest company, almost come together against the bosses and demand more diversity? And I think, without having any concrete examples, I've got a feeling that kind of happening a bit. Saw the thing with the who was you probably know, Roy, the communication company where the owner went out and said something about kebab Norwegian. And there was recently, was it Gelmøy?
Yeah, Gelmøyden, I think, because he has quite a bad reputation of.
But I quite like that the staff, in one way, gathered together and criticised him.
Yeah,
maybe that could lead the way to actually staff in an organisation feeling more empowered to actually we can work towards the management as well. I don't know.
No, if I could add, I think it is, of course, possible for employees to mobilize and speak up as they should, especially when they see something wrong happening, because sometimes if you say nothing, it means you agree. But we cannot place the responsibility on the employees, because currently it's where it rests. The people who raise these issues at companies are people within the minority group, people of color, women. It's never leadership. So absorbing leaders of that responsibility leads to negligence, and we cannot facilitate that. So yes, as an employee, speak up if you feel, because you also have to understand that in some roles, maybe if I am an employee, I am empowered to speak up because I have the language for speaking up. I have the tools to speak up. But there are some people who really need that job, or really don't have, the voice to speak up, or are not, conflict averse. But the responsibility can never lie with the employee. No. You have a right to speak up, but leaders should do the work and also create an environment where that is okay to do. So one of the things I say, even within my team, because now I have a team of amazing women who work with me, and I've done my best to create an environment where they can call me out on my BS, and it's not always nice, because sometimes I'm just like, Chisom, you did this. And then I'm just like, well, yeah, I did this. So good job. But you also have to create an environment where that is possible, because sometimes employees fear repercussions. And there are people, stories where you hear women who've spoken up and they've been let go of work from their jobs for one reason or the other. So leadership is where it rests. Okay, thank you very much. Moving swiftly along, just so that we can cover more questions. Kirthi asked a question. This is quite interesting. She says, what about when employers recruit people from foreign countries because companies need their competence? Where is the bias then? Is it fair to assume that a biased employer will tolerate someone because they need them? Who would like to jump in and answer that?
Can you just ask the first part of the question again?
What about when employers recruit people from foreign countries because they need their competence? Where is the bias then? Is it fair to assume that a biased employer will tolerate someone because they need them?
So kind of what you're saying, that they will tolerate them because they kind of desperation. We just need someone, therefore we go abroad, kind of.
Yeah, so it's a twofold question. So the company has recruited a foreign national because they need the skills. So she's saying, well, where's the bias, basically? And will, in your opinion, a company tolerate somebody just because they need their skills, even though they're biased against them?
I can answer briefly from my point, because obviously I don't know all the different industries and whatnot. And obviously there's a lot of foreign workers in, building sector and whatnot. But we get asked sometimes from clients to say, can you make sure that you also look abroad in Europe or in the US or wherever it may be? But typically that's because they feel that the best people are out there. It could be so, like you will know, Roy, it could be some technology thing that there isn't many people in Norway who have done. So they actually see that we need to go out to get people. I don't think they do it in kind of desperation and think, oh, we don't normally want Albanian, but in this case we can because we're so desperate. I think it's more strategic thinking that it's because they can actually really contribute.
If I may say something, I totally agree with Erik. If you are a company that is so aware of very specific skill set that you need in an employer, you don't really care about where that employee comes from. If you want to find the best, talking about tech now, one of the big new fields that is coming up now is people who are able to analyze big data. And there's very, very few people around in the world who are actually good at this. I know there's a study in the university in Lviv that is actually educating people within this field, and it's one of the few in the world. So obviously any company in Norway or whatever would try to follow what's happening in that university because they have actually started educating people within this field, and there's a demand all over the world. So those kind of companies, they don't care they're very skill-driven companies. So that is kind of a different set of companies because the skills are so extremely important that the gender, the sexual orientation, the culture, whatever, becomes probably less important than in a lot of other jobs that you find people for.
If I could add to that, I think that both Erik and Roy make excellent points. I just wanted to bring in a different perspective of being too white or black, because there are a lot of shades of gray in between. Because we have heard in America, for example, where a basketball team owner, even though he recruits the best people because they have the skills, still, I forget the one who, called them the N-word or this or that, you still have that bias. So you tolerate them because, hey, they're cash machines. They're making you a lot of money. So that is absolutely possible and it happens. I guess to answer that question, I think that it is possible that people use people for their specific skills. If you need someone who speaks Albanian, of course, you have to make sure that they're actually skilled at that job and they can speak the language, but you could also, have biases against them that is real. So as an employer, it is your responsibility to take active steps to unlearn biases and to relearn new ways to deal and accommodate the people who work with and for you. So that would be kind of just my add, but definitely Erik and Roy also have great points here.
Okay, thank you so much. Coming to a question by Carmen Mack, I hope I said that correctly. It says here, who should be demanding a more diverse workforce in Norwegian companies? Should it be white native Norwegians in privileged C-level positions or managerial level? Should it be white native Norwegian in privileged C-level positions or managerial level demand this? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. So who should be demanding a more diverse workforce? You were talking about this earlier, Erik, you were saying employees should maybe club together, and Chisom, you were saying should be leadership level. So we did kind of touch on this, but I did want to raise Carl's question.
I think I don't know whether who should, or because I agree with Chisom, it isn't the employees that are responsible. The people that will be able to make most impact is young, call it up and coming people. So people studying now or people who left university the last 3, 4, 5 years, they are the ones who can set the standard for how we do this in the future. And thankfully, at least within my industry, they do. And all these companies, I don't know, is it Kahoot? It's got 49 different nationalities. And, that's a young company. Cognite as well, I think they got 37. Air things have 29. It's a young company. So these young people are actually ganging together and really praising the fact that they're getting so many cool people from different places. So they can make the most impact, but I don't know, you're probably going to say they're not responsible, Chisom, and they're not. So it needs to also come from the top.
No, I'm not going to say that. I definitely agree with you. I think that we all need to take responsibility. I think that kind of the basis of, you know, for me, how I was raised is if you see something wrong and you do nothing, it means you agree. So of course, the way I was raised to speak up. And so I'm that stubborn person. I'm there protesting because I was raised this way. But there are people who are shy. There are people who do not like to speak publicly. There are people who might want to send in anonymous feedbacks instead. So, but everyone needs to feel empowered. I think everyone who's here, regardless of the levels of positions they're in their workplace, you know, they're here to learn how to have the right language and the tools to, you know, fight this, at least I hope. But I think Kaman's question was really targeting, should it be, yes, young people have a lot of power, employees have a lot of power, but should it be the employees of color who are carrying the torch, or should it also be the people within the majority group? Because I think that there is a lot of impact that can be made there. So an example for could be, if you get on a bus and you witness racism, say in that bus, most of the people, so let me give an example. So imagine I were in Nigeria and I'm in a bus full of Nigerians and there was a white woman in the bus, and then someone is racially harassing her. Of course, that white woman can speak up for herself and say, hey, you're a bigot, you know, like, this is wrong. But it carries more power if me as a Nigerian goes, this is wrong, this is unacceptable, this is ridiculous. Because then what that does is, as the other person who's like me thinks, okay, somebody else like me, you know, so this comes to the me versus them, or us versus them. Somebody else like me actually thinks that this is wrong, and it will force you to think about what can we actually do to change. So this is where the conversation about active allyship comes in. It cannot only be the people who are suffering from, you know, the challenges or the, you know, whatever that comes from discrimination, unconscious bias, or racism that should be carrying the torch, because it's so easy to dismiss them as, oh, it's all in your head, or oh, you're overthinking this. But when you have people from the majority group joining that fight, then you might say, let me listen to what my child is about to tell me, because, you know, I know her, I understand how she was raised.
You bang on. And yeah, like a question referred back to the majority group. Yeah, a white person should take as much responsibility for this as those people who could feel as the offer, if you like. Hi, Manuela, long time.
Yeah, or whatever the majority group is in that location. So Chisom, very quickly, this question is for you, very quickly, as you're the DEIB expert here. What is the difference? This is a question from Nelly. What is the difference between inclusion and belonging? Just a 1 minute summary of the difference between those two, please. What's the difference between inclusion and belonging?
I think so. It's difficult to give an answer in 1 minute. But I think that inclusion, I like to think about it as it's an art. There's no blueprint for how you do inclusion, but it's in making the effort to see people, to invite their opinions to a table. If, for example, you are a man in a boardroom and you notice that oftentimes when women there are trying to speak up, or in a meeting, and then there's a particular man who, you know, often interrupts them, what you could do is say, hi, Hyacinth, I noticed that you've been interrupted a couple of times. Please share your point of view. You know, so it's in the little things that there is no blueprint for how you do this, but it requires a lot of emotional intelligence and actions to ensure that everyone is included. Another example could be, just to show how this can be an art, you know, another example could be, imagine if you're having a self-care day at work, and you have different groups of women from different backgrounds, and you say, say, okay, today we're going to curl our hair. We're going to bring in experts to show us how to style our hair. What if one of the women, you know, wears a hijab and that is not something that she can participate in? Have you thought about her before you decided on that particular activity? So it's just the concept of, you know, one of the reasons, for example, that I founded Her Space, which is a co-working community for women and mothers here in Norway, was oftentimes I worked into all other co-working communities and felt like as much as they're diverse and inclusive, they had not thought about me. So belonging is basically the results of inclusive practices. It is the results when somebody really sees you and somebody makes space for you, then you feel belong, like that you belong. So it's not something you can do, but it's something that you can activate by having equitable, diverse, and inclusive practices. And then people feel like, yeah, this is me, this is my home, they see me. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, if I was answering that question, I was answering very quickly. I would have said inclusion is the actions and the policies that you put in place, and belonging is how people feel. But thank you. I love that you always expound upon things and go quite deep with your answers. So the next question is coming from Utah. And this I will direct to you, Erik. Roy, please chip in if you've got an answer for this. Is there something that an applicant can do to avoid being put in a box?
First thing that comes into my head, no. Because it all depends on the person that's reading it.
Okay.
So it's the person that's reading it that's going to decide whether to put that person in a box or not. So if I was someone that felt discriminated, I think the worst thing you can do is even think about it or worry about it. You just kind of got to just accept the fact that the person you're sending it to could be an idiot or not.
Thank you.
The answer, yeah, I'm pretty convinced no. But Roy, maybe you have some more thoughtfulness to it.
Actually, sorry, Roy, I'm going to ask you a different question, come to think of it, because we just need to get through. Maria is asking, how is it best to react when someone displays or expresses bias without realizing?
Oh, well, I think that's depends on the situation. But Maria is quite correct that people who are being actively biased on would notice very fast that this is happening. Now, I come from a world of sales, and in sales, you ask questions. And I think the best solution here would be asking a question. Is there a reason for? I noticed that you ask these kind of questions that make people think about what they just did. I would say that probably is the best way to attack this problem, because if you start attacking people and you say, oh, you did, why don't you look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you? You put people in a defensive position. And as we know, people do not like to change their position unless they actually come up with the idea to change it themselves. Having someone else trying to change your ideas is not working. We all know that. But if someone actually opens up your mind by asking a question, you have to actually rethink about what you just did, then you actually might change your opinion about it yourself. That's the psychology behind making people change their mind and making them aware of things is asking the questions, asking the right questions.
Absolutely. I have to agree with Roy on this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Erik, before when you was talking about recruitment and recruitment practices, there's another question here that's talking about the recruitment bots. So it's saying, will we train the recruitment bots accordingly? Now, I've seen a lot of discussions about this, how these recruitment bots are filtering applications. So saying that, will we train the recruitment bots accordingly? Because jobs will not be offered to everyone, and then applicants will also be sorted through before you have a chance to decide consciously. What are your thoughts on recruitment bots?
Yeah, I saw Kevin Reader post something, but I also saw he's just left now. But he said that what did he say?
He said,
I don't know if someone saw it. He said something about the algorithms can be tailored to be unconscious biased or something like that. I don't know. And honestly, in terms of you know, robotic recruitment or whatever you call it. I don't know enough about it because I'm still a bit skeptical to it, because I can't think of a way where, like I said earlier, if this robot, whatever, sends through 10 CVs to me, I will still go in on LinkedIn and see your picture and see your name and see that you're from Manchester in your case. So unless we remove LinkedIn, Facebook or Instagram, whatever it is, I can always find out info if I want to. So the only thing it could help with is maybe to give me 10 candidates based on some set algorithms, but then I can still be biased if I want to.
Yes, that's true. Kevin actually said it's already been proven that developer bias is in algorithms and software, and I have seen a lot of conversations about that on LinkedIn. So the next question is coming from Sonia. Erik, from what you observe in recruitment, how are organizations in Norway moving towards mitigating unconscious bias?
Hi, Sonia, by the way. Ask the question back. Do they actually do anything? You see, I work with a lot of smaller companies, you know, up to maybe 200 employees, and there really isn't a problem there. And I would like to hope that bigger corporations like Telenor, DNB, Telia, whatever it may be, are working on this. But Sonia, I don't know. I'm not sure. So I don't want to kind of guess what DNB are doing or what Telenor are doing. So sorry, Sonia, this time I for once don't have an answer.
Is the question on what larger companies are doing towards D&I and unconscious bias?
Yes, how we could mitigate it, but I think you guys have covered that quite a lot, and so I would.
If I could just add, I think that there are just to touch on what Erik is saying about, you know, companies like Telenor and DNB. I think they're actually doing some work, and I think they are trying to actively improve as well. I think they recognize as well that oftentimes gender has just fallen on, diversity has fallen on gender, and they're actively trying to fix this. You know, I'm talking to people from, I've had conversations with people from DNB, with Telenor, with even Opera, and I know that these companies are on the way. They are not there yet because, of course, it's not a set destination, but you're definitely looking into it, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Okay, just to include our participants who are on the live stream on Facebook, Liana says, just a thought. I think it's important for job interviewers to be aware, especially with minority interviewees, that they might not have had opportunities the same as others because of past discriminations. So looking at their past jobs, accomplishments and positions might not be a true representation of someone's ability. And Chisom, you were talking about that before. And Ellen was saying that she believes that is 100% lacking in the startup world in Oslo. From her experience, her middle manager yelled at her saying, in Norway, we don't care about pronouns, which was, yes, that was just feedback from somebody from Facebook. Question. Sorry, I'm just scanning through the comments here. We literally have like 2 minutes left. Kevin says, question from Kevin, let's talk about the value, and this is what we're going to end on today. Let's talk about the value of diversity, how diverse teams can outperform heterogeneous ones if handled well. So Chisom.
Oh, I think the business case for this has been made, I think, forever now. You know, just a simple search on, you know, Google, you will see research upon research upon research that supports, you know, this, that shows that a more diverse team, a more heterogeneous team actually leads to more productivity, more innovation, places companies at more competitive levels than even their competitors. professionals. So the business case has been made, you know, the human case has been made. So it's just for companies everywhere and Norway to catch up.
Awesome. So thank you. We have 1 minute left. So I'd just like to thank all of our participants today. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for the conversation. It's been fantastic. Obviously, we could talk for hours on this topic because, you know, it's a very interesting topic. And, you know, unfortunately, we will have to end here.
Thanks to you. You've done a really good job in steering this. I've learned a lot. Now I can hold these things as well. And we're going to have a clubhouse on this maybe next Thursday for those of you who are on iPhone. And thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be part of, guys.
Wonderful. So what we'll do, we'll send you a follow-up to today. Will they receive the link to the video, Chisom, in the
Yes.
follow-up?
Yes,
Okay.
so I think they will get an email one of these days, hopefully by early next week at latest, with a link to rewatch it if they need to. Yeah, so you'll be able to rewatch it. We also have some resources that we can share with you, some training courses. Harvard, for example, have a test that you can take to check and see how biased you are. And there's various tests that you can take. So we'll share some resources with you of trainings that you can do, some of them free, some of them paid, some resources that you can read, all about unconscious bias, how to tackle it, how to identify it within yourself. So we'll send all of that in the follow-up email. Thanks again. And if I could add, Hyacinth, really quickly, Nikki just posted on the chat the next event, which would be, you know, also discussing diversity and inclusion in the workplace, but the focus being gender equality and equity, and also evaluating all the different intersectionalities within gender, not just women. And this will happen next month in honor of International Women's Day and month. So I hope that you will all join us. Really, I just wanted to plug in here and say thank you for, you know, being here for your 2 hours. We value your time. So really appreciate your time. Yes, the date for that was March 24th, if you'd like to plan it into your diary.